The gurney came through the emergency room doors, and I saw his wrist bones first, protruding like jagged stones beneath paper-thin skin. His eyes were closed, his cheeks sunken into hollow caves, and the oxygen mask covered most of his face. I stood frozen in the middle of the corridor while nurses rushed past me, their voices muffled and distant like I was underwater. I had seen my father 6 months ago at his 74th birthday party, robust and laughing, cutting into a chocolate cake Sarah Jenkins had baked from scratch. The man on that gurney was a ghost wearing my father's face. I had to make a choice in that moment. I could fall apart, or I could become the one thing they never saw coming. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that family should never become the ones who hurt you most. My name is Claudia Vance. I am 39 years old and a senior forensic document examiner for the Department of Justice based in Washington, D.C. I specialize in fraud and forgery cases, which means I spend my days staring at signatures, examining ink patterns, and identifying the microscopic differences between authentic documents and the ones criminals try to pass off as real. I had built a career on spotting lies hidden in plain sight. I never expected to find them carved into my own father's body. The call came at 11:47 a.m. on October 14th. I was in my office at the DOJ headquarters in D.C., running a spectrographic analysis on a contested will from a federal fraud case when my personal phone vibrated against the mahogany desk. My father's name appeared on the screen, William Vance. I smiled and answered, expecting to hear his familiar gruff voice asking about the weather or reminding me to check my tire pressure before winter set in. What I heard instead was a whisper, raspy, desperate, broken. "Claudia, please come home." The line went dead before I could respond. I called back 6 times in rapid succession. Each call went straight to voicemail. My heart hammered against my ribs as I grabbed my bag and told my supervisor I had a family emergency. I didn't wait for approval. I was out the door and in my car within 3 minutes, my hands shaking as I dialed the number again and again. The drive from D.C. to Fairfax, Virginia took 42 minutes. I made it in 31. I ran every red light on Route 50, my BMW cutting through afternoon traffic like a blade. My mind churned through every possible scenario. A fall, a stroke, a heart attack. My father was 74, healthy, active. He volunteered at the local elementary school. He walked 2 miles every morning. He was the most stubborn, independent man I had ever known. He had raised me alone after my mother died when I was 12, working double shifts as a maintenance supervisor while still finding time to coach my soccer team and help me with algebra homework. He never asked for help. He never complained. For him to call me like that, whispering, desperate, something catastrophic had happened. I pulled into the driveway of 1423 Maplewood Lane at 12:38 p.m. The house looked wrong from the moment I stepped out of the car. The lawn was overgrown, the grass brown and patchy where it used to be immaculate. The front porch had a stack of unopened newspapers dating back weeks. "A, for sale," sign stood in the front yard, and I stared at it for 5 full seconds before my brain processed what I was seeing. My father had lived in this house for 31 years. He had told me 100 times he would die in that house. He would never have put it up for sale. I climbed the porch steps and tried the front door. Locked. I fumbled for the key I kept on my keychain, my fingers clumsy and uncoordinated. The door swung open and the smell hit me first. Stale air, unwashed linens, and something else. Something sour and medicinal and wrong. The living room was a disaster. Dishes piled in the sink visible from the hallway. Curtains drawn. The television was off, the silence oppressive and heavy. "Dad!" I called out. My voice echoed through the empty rooms. No response. I moved through the kitchen, my footsteps loud on the tile floor. The refrigerator was nearly empty, except for a carton of milk that had expired 3 weeks ago, and a container of moldy takeout. The cabinets held nothing but a few cans of soup and a box of crackers. My father, who cooked every meal from scratch and prided himself on his homemade chili, had nothing to eat in his own kitchen. "Dad," I called again, louder this time. Panic was rising in my throat like bile. I heard a faint sound from the back of the house, a scratching, a thump. I followed the noise down the hallway toward the guest bedroom, the one my father used as a den for his woodworking projects. The door was closed. The scratching sound came from behind it, rhythmic and weak like fingernails dragging across wood. I tried the handle. Locked. "Dad, it's me, it's Claudia. Open the door." The scratching stopped. A voice, barely audible, came through the wood. "Claudia, I'm here, I'm right here. Open the door." "I can't." They locked it from the outside. I stared at the door, my brain refusing to process his words. They locked it from the outside. I dropped to my knees and examined the doorframe. There was a deadbolt on the exterior side, installed recently by the look of the fresh screw holes and slightly mismatched paint. Someone had locked my 74-year-old father inside a bedroom. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I stood up, took 2 steps back, and drove my shoulder into the door with every ounce of strength I possessed. The frame splintered but held. I hit it again, and again. On the 4th impact, the wood cracked and the door swung inward, slamming against the interior wall. My father was on the floor. He was curled in the corner of the room, his knees drawn up to his chest, his body so thin I could count every rib through his stained t-shirt. His hands were shaking. His face was a road map of bruises, yellow and purple and black, contusions that spread across his cheekbones and jaw. His wrists were wrapped in gauze, the fabric stained with dried blood. His eyes found mine, and I saw something I had never seen in my father's face before. Fear. "Dad," I whispered. My legs gave out and I dropped to my knees beside him. "Dad, what happened? Who did this to you?" He tried to speak but coughed instead, a wet, rattling sound that came from deep in his chest. His hand reached for mine, and when I took it, I felt bones shifting beneath papery skin. He had been starved, dehydrated, abused. "Rodney," he managed to say. "Priscilla, they took everything." I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The operator answered, and I gave the address in a voice I barely recognized as my own. "My father is injured. He needs an ambulance immediately. 1423 Maplewood Lane. Please hurry." While I waited, I pulled my father into my arms as gently as I could, cradling his head against my chest. He weighed nothing. He had always been a solid man, broad-shouldered and strong, but now he was bird bones and paper skin. I rocked him back and forth and told him he was safe. He was going to be okay. I was here now and I wasn't leaving. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. They strapped my father to a gurney, and I rode in the ambulance with him, holding his hand the entire way. The sirens wailed and the lights flashed, and I watched the gray sky through the small window above his head and tried to remember how to breathe. Mercy General Hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and sterile hallways. Nurses swarmed around my father, attaching monitors, starting Roman IV lines, running tests. I stood against the wall with my arms wrapped around myself, watching them work, feeling completely useless. Dr. Anya Sharma found me in the waiting room 37 minutes later. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a tired expression, her white coat immaculate despite the chaos of the emergency department. She sat down beside me and folded her hands in her lap. "MS, Vance," she said quietly. "I'm Dr. Sharma. I've been treating your father. We need to talk." I followed her to a small consultation room down the hall. The walls were beige and bare. A single fluorescent bulb hummed overhead. I sat in the plastic chair across from her and gripped my knees so hard my knuckles turned white. "Your father is severely malnourished," Dr. Sharma began. She spoke in a calm, clinical tone, but her eyes held something heavier. "He has lost approximately 35 pounds in what we estimate to be the last 8 to 10 weeks. He's severely dehydrated. His blood work shows critical deficiencies in potassium, sodium, and protein. He has multiple contusions on his face, torso, and extremities. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. There's more. Dr. Sharma reached for my father's chart and opened it. He has lacerations and bruising on both wrists consistent with restraint. Fabric ties, most likely. There are also pressure sores on his back and hips that suggest he was confined to a single position for extended periods. We found evidence that his prescription medications were deliberately withheld. His blood pressure is dangerously high. He should have been taking his heart medication daily, but there were no traces of it in his system. I heard her words, but they didn't make sense. They were clinical descriptions of a nightmare, restraints, withheld medication, confinement. These were things that happened to strangers, not to William Vance, the man who taught me how to ride a bike and stood in the rain to watch my college graduation. Who did this to him? Dr. Sharma asked gently. I have to report this to the authorities. This is a clear case of elder abuse. Someone deliberately inflicted this harm on your father. My brother, I heard myself say. The words tasted like poison. My brother Rodney and his wife Priscilla, they live with him. They've been living with him for the last 2 years. He wanted to help them get back on their feet after Rodney lost his teaching job. Dr. Sharma nodded slowly. I need to document this for the police. Are you able to stay with him tonight? He's going to need someone he trusts. I'm not leaving him. She led me back to the emergency room, and I stood at my father's bedside while a nurse adjusted his Roman IV line. He was sleeping, his face slack and peaceful for the first time since I'd found him. His bruises looked worse in the harsh hospital light. Dark purple pools beneath his left eye, yellow-green stains along his jawline. I counted 7 distinct contusions on his visible skin. I could only imagine what lay beneath his hospital gown. A doctor's assistant brought me a folder of medical records, and I flipped through them mechanically. Weight records, blood work, a signed consent form for treatment with my father's signature, except the signature wasn't his. I held the consent form up to the light and stared at it. I had examined thousands of questioned documents over the course of my career. I had testified in federal court about forged signatures, fraudulent wills, counterfeit financial instruments. I knew handwriting the way a pianist knows keys. That signature was not my father's. The W was too looped. The V slanted the wrong direction. It was a good forgery, the work of someone who had studied his signature carefully, but it was wrong in ways that screamed at me like a false note in a familiar song. I called my father's primary care physician's office from the hospital waiting room. The receptionist confirmed the last appointment had been 3 months ago. I asked about medication refills. She told me they had been consistently sending refill requests to the pharmacy at 1423 Maplewood Lane for the last 8 weeks, and the prescriptions had been picked up regularly. By whom? I asked. The name on file was Priscilla Vance. I sat down in the plastic chair and stared at the ceiling. My sister-in-law had been picking up my father's medication. The medication he never received. The medication that could have prevented the dangerous blood pressure spike that Dr. Sharma had noted. She had been stealing his pills, throwing them away, letting him suffer. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. My father and I shared a joint account for emergency purposes, a precaution we'd set up years ago when I moved to D.C. I never used it, never even checked the balance. What I saw made my stomach drop to the floor. Over the last 3 months, multiple large withdrawals had been made from the account. Wire transfers to an online gambling platform called Stakeholders Bet, deposits to offshore accounts, cash withdrawals of $10,000 at a time, a total of $310,000, 78 gone. The money my father had saved for 30 years, his retirement, his safety net, his entire financial security wiped out in a matter of weeks. I scrolled further. A power of attorney document had been filed with the bank, authorizing Rodney Vance to manage my father's accounts. The filing date was August 15th, 2 months ago. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. In, out. I had to think clearly. I had to stop reacting and start planning. I walked back into my father's room and sat beside his bed. His eyes fluttered open and found mine. "Claudia," he whispered. His voice was like sandpaper. "I'm here, Dad. I'm right here. Did you call? Did you call the police?" "Not yet, but I will. I promise you I will." He reached for my hand and I took it carefully, mindful of the Roman 4 line. His grip was weak but insistent. "They said they were helping me," he said, his voice cracking. "Priscilla said she would take care of the bills. Rodney said he was looking for a job, then they started charging me rent for my own house. Then they took my phone. They said I was too old to manage my own affairs. They locked me in that room and they—" Tears filled his eyes and he turned his face away from me. I could feel the shame radiating off him, the humiliation of being overpowered by his own son. "Dad, look at me." I waited until he turned back. "I am going to fix this. Every single thing they did to you, I am going to expose. I am going to make them pay. Do you hear me? I am not going to let them get away with this." He squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. I stayed at his bedside until he fell asleep again, his breathing slow and rhythmic. A nurse came in to check his vitals and gently suggested I get some rest. I thanked her, but I didn't leave. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bruises on his face. I heard his voice whispering my name from behind a locked door. Around midnight, I stepped out into the hospital parking lot. The air was cold, October crisp, and I wrapped my arms around myself as I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and stared through the windshield at the dark sky. And then I broke. It came out of nowhere, a sob that tore through my chest like a physical wound. I leaned forward and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and I wept. I sobbed until I couldn't breathe, until my body shook with violent, uncontrollable grief. I thought about my father alone in that room, starving, hurting, wondering if anyone would ever come for him. I thought about my brother, my own flesh and blood, locking him in like an animal. I thought about Priscilla, the woman who had smiled at family gatherings and brought casseroles to Thanksgiving dinners, hitting my elderly father and stealing his medication. I sobbed for 20 minutes, maybe longer. I lost track of time. The tears just kept coming, hot and endless, and I let them. I let the grief wash over me because I knew that once I stopped, I would have to be strong again. I would have to be the weapon that my father needed. And then the tears stopped. Just like that. One moment I was weeping, and the next I was sitting up straight, wiping my face with the back of my hand, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red and swollen. My cheeks were blotchy, but there was something else in my face too, something cold, something hard. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the DOJ Digital Forensics Lab. It was after midnight, but someone would be on duty. Someone always was. "This is Agent Vance," I said when the line connected. My voice was steady, calm. "I need a digital forensics kit couriered to Virginia, priority one, and I need access to the lab's spectrographic database for handwriting authentication." The technician on the other end asked if I was on an active case. "No," I said. "Personal, but I need it yesterday." I hung up and leaned back in my seat. The parking lot was empty except for a few scattered cars. The hospital lights glowed in the distance, white and sterile. I looked at my hands, still shaking slightly, and I made a decision. I was going to build a case, a federal case. I was going to authenticate the forged signatures, trace the stolen money, document the abuse. I was going to use everything I had learned in my decade of forensic investigation to bring my brother and his wife to justice. I was going to do it legally, cleanly, irrefutably. I sat in my car for another 5 minutes, letting the cold settle into my bones. The rage was still there, burning beneath the surface, but it had transformed into something more useful. Focus, precision, the quiet satisfaction of a plan taking shape. I looked back at the hospital and thought of my father sleeping in his bed, safe for the first time in months. I wasn't going to let him down. I wasn't going to let anyone hurt him again. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, headed for 1423 Maplewood Lane. I had work to do. I drove back to 1423 Maplewood Lane at 1:47 a.m. The house sat dark and silent under the dim glow of the streetlights, and I sat in my car for a long moment just staring at it. The place I had grown up in. The place where my father had taught me to ride a bike in the driveway, where we'd had countless Sunday dinners, where he'd stayed up late helping me study for exams. Now it felt like a crime scene, because that's exactly what it was. I got out of the car and walked up the driveway, my footsteps loud in the quiet night. The for sale sign was still there, planted in the front yard like a tombstone. I pulled it out of the ground and threw it in the back of my SUV. That sign didn't belong here. None of what had happened belonged here. The front door was still unlocked from earlier. I stepped inside and flipped on every light switch I could find. The house blazed to life, and in that harsh illumination, I saw everything I had missed in my frantic rush to find my father. The filth, the neglect, the deliberate destruction of a man's life. I started in the kitchen. The cabinets were nearly empty, just as I'd noticed before, but I opened every single one and cataloged what I found. 3 cans of tomato soup, 1 box of stale saltines, a half-empty jar of peanut butter with a use-by date from 6 months ago. The refrigerator held nothing but expired milk, moldy cheese, and a carton of eggs that had turned green. My father had been starving in a house that contained almost no food. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every cabinet, every shelf, the empty refrigerator, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. The electricity bill was 3 months overdue. The water bill was 2 months overdue. The gas bill was about to be shut off. My brother and his wife had been living in this house, eating God knows what, while my father wasted away in a locked room with nothing. I moved to the living room. The television was gone. So was the stereo system. The antique grandfather clock that had belonged to my grandmother was missing. I opened the drawers of the sideboard and found them empty. They had been selling his things, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. I climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. My father's bedroom was at the end of the hall, and I pushed the door open with a sense of dread. The room had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, closet empty except for a few threadbare shirts. His wedding ring, the one he had worn for 47 years, was gone. His watch, the gold Rolex he had bought himself after 30 years at the school district, was gone. Everything of value had been stripped away. And then I found the paperwork. In the bottom drawer of his nightstand, beneath a layer of old photographs and greeting cards, was a folder stuffed with documents. I pulled it out and sat down on the edge of his bed. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The first page was the power of attorney document. I held it up to the light and examined it with the trained eye of a forensic document examiner. The signature was wrong. The slant was inconsistent. The pressure patterns were uneven. Someone had practiced my father's signature and then applied it to this document with a deliberate, calculated intent to deceive. I would need my lab tools to confirm it definitively, but I already knew. This was a forgery. I flipped to the next page. A letter from a local real estate agency confirming the listing of the house for $475,000. The listing agreement was signed with the same forged signature. Behind that, a series of bank statements showing the steady drain of funds from my father's accounts. Month by month, the balance had dropped. $3,000 here, $5,000 there. And then the wire transfers began. I pulled out my laptop and connected to the hospital's guest Wi-Fi. I logged into my father's banking portal using his password, the same one he'd used for everything since I was a teenager. The transaction history was a horror show of financial predation. On August 15th, the day after the POA was filed, the first wire transfer went out. $25,000 to an account I didn't recognize. On August 22nd, another $18,000. On September 1st, $32,000. The pattern continued throughout September and into October. Every few days, another chunk of money vanished into the black hole of online gambling. I traced the recipient accounts through the banking metadata. Most of them were to an online gambling platform called Stakeholders Bet. The platform was based offshore, but the money trail was clear. Rodney had been feeding his addiction with my father's life savings. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my father's bedroom. The silence was oppressive. I thought about him lying in that hospital bed, sedated and fragile, and I felt the rage building in my chest again. But I pushed it down. Rage was a luxury I couldn't afford. I needed to be cold. I needed to be precise. I needed to be the investigator I had trained to be. I spent the next 2 hours going through every room in the house. In the garage, I found a stack of medical prescriptions hidden beneath a pile of old newspapers. My father's heart medication, his blood pressure medication, his arthritis medication. Dozens of bottles, all unopened, all dated from the last 3 months. Priscilla had been picking up the prescriptions from the pharmacy and then hiding them, keeping my father in a state of pain and medical distress. In the backyard, I found the remnants of a vegetable garden that had been allowed to die. My father had always grown tomatoes and peppers and herbs in the summer. The plants were brown and withered, the soil hard and cracked. My father, who had spent his retirement tending to that garden, hadn't been allowed to touch it. I found a burner phone in the kitchen trash can, an inexpensive prepaid device with no identifying information. I bagged it carefully and added it to my evidence collection. It was a small thing, but in my experience, small things often led to bigger things. I was still going through the kitchen when I heard a knock at the front door. I froze, my heart pounding. It was 3:15 a.m. Who would be at the door at this hour? I walked slowly to the front door and peered through the small window. A man stood on the porch. He was in his early 50s with a weathered face and a military bearing. He wore a dark jacket and held a flashlight that was pointed at the ground. He looked concerned, not threatening. I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" The man looked at me with a mixture of recognition and worry. "You're William's daughter, aren't you? Claudia, I'm Marcus Webb. I live next door." I opened the door wider. "Mr. Webb, I remember you. You helped my father fix his fence a few years ago." He nodded, his expression grave. "I saw the ambulance earlier, and I saw you pull in. Is William okay? Is he going to be all right?" I felt my throat tighten. "He's in the hospital, he's stable, but they did a lot of damage." Marcus Webb's jaw tightened. He glanced over his shoulder at the dark house next door and then back at me. I knew something was wrong. I tried to tell someone. I called the police twice, but they said they couldn't do anything without a complaint from the victim. "What did you see?" I asked. "I saw your brother and his wife. I saw them come and go at all hours. I saw the garbage cans overflowing. I saw the newspapers piling up on the porch." He paused, his eyes darkening. "And I saw the way they treated William, your sister-in-law especially. She'd scream at him in the front yard. I heard it through my window one night. She called him a useless old man and told him he was lucky she let him stay in his own house." I felt a cold fury settle in my bones. "Did you ever see her hit him?" Marcus Webb hesitated. "I didn't see it with my own eyes, but I heard it. I heard him cry out, and then I heard her laughing." I closed my eyes and took a breath. "Mr. Webb, do you have security cameras?" He nodded slowly. "I have a doorbell camera and one pointed at my driveway. They don't cover your entire property, but they catch the front porch and part of the walkway. Can I see the footage?" He looked at me for a long moment, and then he nodded. "I'll get the recordings, but you should know that your sister-in-law tried to get me to take them down. She said I was invading her privacy. She threatened to call the police on me." "And what did you say?" Marcus Webb smiled grimly. "I told her to go ahead. I told her I'd be happy to show the police what I'd been recording." I felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you so much." We agreed to meet at his house at first light when he could access his recording system. I watched him walk back across his lawn and disappear into his house, and then I closed the door and leaned against it. I had a witness. I had a potential source of video evidence. I was building a case. I was back at the hospital by 5:30 a.m. My father was awake, sitting up in bed with a tray of food in front of him that he was picking at half-heartedly. The bruises on his face were more vivid in the morning light. Purple and black and yellow splattered across his cheeks like abstract art. "Dad," I said softly, "how are you feeling?" He looked up at me and tried to smile. It was a weak gesture, barely a twitch of his lips. "Better, they gave me something for the pain." I sat down beside his bed. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened. Is that okay?" He nodded slowly. "I've been waiting to tell someone. No one would listen. Rodney said I was losing my mind. Priscilla said I was senile." His voice cracked. I started to believe them. "Dad, you're not losing your mind. You're not senile. You're a victim of elder abuse, and I am going to prove it." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. "I'm going to record this, okay? Just so I have it in your own words. Is that all right?" He nodded again. "Yes, whatever you need." I pressed record and began asking questions. I started with the beginning. When had Rodney and Priscilla moved in? 2 years ago, he said. Rodney lost his job. He said it was just temporary, that he just needed some time to get back on his feet. She was very sweet at first. She cooked dinner. She helped with the chores. I thought they were just down on their luck. When did things change? He closed his eyes, and I could see the pain in his face as he remembered. About 3 months ago, August, Rodney came to me and said he needed to access my accounts. He said he was setting up a business, an investment opportunity. He said he'd pay me back with interest. I told him no. I told him I needed my money for retirement. And then Priscilla came in and she was different. There was no kindness in her eyes. She said I was a burden. She said I was old and useless and I should be grateful they were taking care of me. What happened next? They took my phone. I had to fight for it, and that's when Priscilla hit me. She slapped me across the face and told me to get back in my room. And then she locked the door. She locked me in there. She only let me out twice a day to use the bathroom. And sometimes, if I was lucky, she brought me a glass of water. I felt the tears burning behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I couldn't. Not now. Did you see the doctor at all during that time? No, they told the doctor I was too weak to come in. They said I was bedridden and they were taking care of me at home. They picked up my prescriptions from the pharmacy, but they never gave them to me. The pain was, I thought I was going to die in that room. I thought they were going to let me die. I stopped recording. I couldn't listen to any more. My father's face was streaked with tears, and I reached out and took his hand in mine. "They're not getting away with this, Dad. I promise you, they are going to face justice." He squeezed my hand weakly. How? How are you going to do that?" "I'm going to use everything I have, everything I've learned in my career. I'm going to build a case that the FBI can't ignore. I'm going to make sure they go to prison for what they did to you." He looked at me with a mixture of hope and doubt. "They are family, Claudia. They are your brother and his wife. They stopped being family the moment they locked you in that room." A nurse came in to check his vitals, and I stepped out into the hallway to give them privacy. As I walked down the corridor toward the waiting room, I saw a familiar face. Sarah Jenkins was sitting in one of the plastic chairs, clutching a paper bag and looking worried. "Sarah," I said, surprised. She stood up and hurried toward me, wrapping me in a warm embrace. "I heard what happened. I came as soon as I could. How is he? Is William okay?" "He's stable," I said. "He's going to be okay. He just needs time to recover." Sarah pulled back and looked me in the eyes. Her gaze was sharp and knowing. I knew something was wrong. I knew it months ago. He stopped coming to the garden club meetings. He stopped answering my calls. I went to the house once and Priscilla told me he was sick and couldn't have visitors. I should have pushed harder. I should have done something. "Sarah, you couldn't have known. None of us could have." She pressed the paper bag into my hands. I brought you some clothes and some food. I figured you hadn't eaten. I looked at the bag and felt the kindness of the gesture wash over me. Thank you. I don't know how to. I don't know what I would do without people like you. She took my hand and squeezed it. You fight, Claudia. That's what you do. That's what your father taught you to do. You fight for the people you love. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We sat down in the waiting room and Sarah told me everything she knew. She had seen the changes in my father over the last few months. He had stopped going to his usual haunts. He had stopped answering his phone. She had tried to visit, but Priscilla had been hostile and dismissive. She told me I wasn't welcome, Sarah said. She said William didn't want to see anyone from the old days, that he was tired and wanted to be left alone. It didn't sound like him. William loved people. He loved his friends. He would never have cut himself off like that. That was her doing, I said. She isolated him. She made sure he had no one to turn to. Sarah nodded grimly. I should have called the police. I should have done something. You didn't know, none of us knew. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Sarah leaned closer and lowered her voice. There's something else, Claudia. Something I think you should know. What is it? About Priscilla. This isn't the first time she's done something like this. I was talking to my neighbor, who used to live in the same apartment complex as Priscilla before she married Rodney. She told me that Priscilla had a reputation. She had a way of attaching herself to older people, people with money. She befriended an elderly woman in the complex, and within a year, the woman had changed her will to leave everything to Priscilla. The family fought it and won, but it was a close thing. They almost lost everything. I stared at her. She's done this before. I don't have proof, it's just gossip, but it's a pattern, Claudia. She goes after vulnerable people. She takes what they have, and she leaves them broken. I felt the pieces clicking into place. This wasn't just about my father. This was about a history of predatory behavior, a pattern of cruelty and greed that had finally found its ultimate target. Thank you, Sarah, I said. That might be very important. She reached out and took my hand. You're going to destroy them, aren't you? I looked at her and I felt a calm certainty settle over me. Yes, I'm going to destroy them, completely and legally. I'm going to take everything they've taken and I'm going to make sure they never hurt anyone again. Sarah nodded slowly. Good, that's exactly what they deserve. We sat together until the sun came up, and then I went back to my father's room. He was sleeping, the lines of pain and worry finally softened in his rest. I stood beside his bed and watched him breathe. He was alive. He was alive, and that was everything. I had 2 days to build a federal case, 2 days to gather every piece of evidence I needed, 2 days to make sure my brother and his wife would never escape justice. I pulled out my phone and called my supervisor at the DOJ. Assistant Director Miller, I said when he answered. I need to take personal leave, effective immediately, and I need access to the lab's resources. What's going on, Vance? I looked at my father's sleeping face, and I felt the steel in my spine harden. I'm going to build a case, sir, a federal elder abuse and fraud case, and I need the full resources of the lab to do it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Assistant Director Miller spoke. I assume this is personal. Yes, sir, very personal. Another pause, and then, I'll authorize the resources. Send me the details when you have them, and Claudia, make sure you follow every procedure to the letter. If there's even a hint of impropriety, the case will be thrown out. Understood, sir. I'll be meticulous. See that you are. I hung up and looked at my father one more time. Then I walked out of the hospital and drove back to 1423 Maplewood Lane. I had work to do. I spent the next 6 hours going through every document in the house. I sorted them into piles: financial records, medical records, correspondence, personal papers. I found evidence of the forged POA, the empty prescriptions, the bank transfers. I created a detailed timeline of every transaction, every withdrawal, every moment of abuse. And then, when I had exhausted every inch of that house, I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at my pile of evidence. It was a mountain. a mountain of betrayal and cruelty and greed, and I was going to turn it into a weapon. I pulled out my phone and looked at the time. It was 10:14 a.m. I had 48 hours. I picked up the folder containing the forged power of attorney document and held it in my hands. I thought about my father, locked in that room, wondering if anyone would ever come for him. I thought about the fear in his eyes when I'd found him. I thought about the bruises on his wrists. And then I got to work. I opened my laptop and began typing. I was going to build a case, a federal case, and I was going to build it so solid, so airtight that my brother and his wife would never see the light of day again. I smiled, and it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had found her purpose. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah Jenkins. Marcus Webb just called. He's got the video footage ready. Doorbell camera. You need to see it. I typed back, I'll be there in 10 minutes. I stood up, gathered my evidence, and walked out of my father's house for the last time as a victim's daughter. When I returned, I would be something else entirely, something far more dangerous. I had made my choice. I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to become the one thing they never saw coming. I drove to Marcus Webb's house with my heart pounding against my ribs. The morning sun was just starting to burn through the October haze, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street. I parked my SUV in his driveway and walked up to his front door, the folder of evidence tucked under my arm like a weapon. Marcus opened the door before I could knock. He looked like he hadn't slept much either, his eyes tired but alert. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "I've got everything ready." His living room was neat and orderly, military precision in every corner. A large television monitor was mounted on the wall, and a laptop sat on the coffee table connected to it with a tangle of cables. Marcus gestured for me to sit, and I lowered myself onto the leather couch, my fingers gripping the edge of the cushion. "I pulled the footage from the last 3 months," he said, sitting down beside me. I started paying closer attention after I heard the first scream. "I've got 7 different clips that I think you need to see." He clicked the mouse, and the television screen came to life. The image was grainy but clear enough, a wide-angle view of my father's front porch and walkway. The timestamp in the corner reads September 2nd, 2023. "Here," Marcus said, pointing at the screen. "Watch." The video showed my father shuffling out the front door. He was wearing his old cardigan, the one with the frayed elbows, and he moved slowly, his body stooped with exhaustion and pain. He was trying to reach the mailbox at the end of the walkway. He had made it halfway when the front door flew open behind him. Priscilla appeared, her face twisted with fury. She was wearing designer yoga pants and a silk blouse, her perfectly styled hair a stark contrast to the cruelty in her expression. She strode down the walkway and grabbed my father by the arm, yanking him backward with such force that he stumbled and nearly fell. "What do you think you're doing?" she screamed. "I told you to stay in your room." My father's voice was weak, barely audible through the audio. "I just wanted to get the mail. It's been piling up." I said no. Priscilla shoved him hard, and my father staggered back against the porch railing. "You're going to make us look bad. You're going to ruin everything." She slapped him across the face. The crack of her hand against his skin echoed through the audio, sharp and violent. My father crumpled against the railing, his hands coming up to protect his face. Priscilla stood over him, her fists clenched. "Get back inside," she hissed. "And if I catch you out here again, I'll make sure you regret it." My father limped back into the house. Priscilla followed him, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled in the frame. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with tears that I refused to let fall. That was my father. That was my father being slapped and shoved and terrorized in his own home, and I had to watch it. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. "I'm sorry, but you need to see all of it." He clicked to the next clip. September 14th. Priscilla was on the porch with a clipboard, discussing something with a man in a suit. The man's jacket bore the logo of a real estate agency. They were pointing at the house, and Priscilla was smiling. She looked calm, pleasant, the face of a woman selling a home she had no right to sell. The next clip was October 8th. My father was at the front door trying to open it. The door was locked. I watched him pull at the handle with his frail hands, his shoulders shaking with effort. He pressed his face against the glass, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. He was trying to get out. He was trying to escape. And then Rodney appeared behind him. My brother, my own brother. He pulled my father away from the door by the collar of his shirt, dragging him backward with cold efficiency. My father's hands clawed at the air, trying to grab onto something, anything, but Rodney was too strong. "I told you to stay away from the door," Rodney said. His voice was flat, unemotional. "Stop causing problems." My father said something I couldn't hear. Rodney pushed him down the hallway and out of frame. The door slammed shut. I sat in silence for a long moment. My hands were shaking. My jaw was clenched so tightly I could feel my teeth grinding against each other. I forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. "How many more clips?" I asked, my voice strained. "3 more, Marcus said. They're all similar, the yelling, the physical contact, the threats. I also have footage from the day the real estate agent came to list the house. Priscilla and Rodney were both there. They were laughing, joking around, like they were selling a vacation home instead of stealing a dying man's last asset." I nodded slowly. "I need copies of everything, all of it. Can you transfer it to a USB drive?" "Already done." Marcus reached into his pocket and handed me a small flash drive. "I also downloaded the audio files. I figured you might need the raw data for whatever you're planning." I took the drive and held it in my palm. It was small, barely the size of my thumb, but it contained evidence that would send my brother and his wife to prison. 3 months of abuse, 3 months of torment, all captured in digital clarity. "Thank you," I said. "I don't know how to repay you for this." Marcus shook his head. "You don't have to repay me. I just want to see justice done. Your father is a good man. He didn't deserve any of this." "No," I agreed. "He didn't." I stood up and gathered my things. Marcus walked me to the door and paused, his hand on the frame. "One more thing," he said. "A few days ago, I saw your sister-in-law packing things into her car. Furniture, artwork, things I recognized from your father's house. She's been selling his possessions." "How do you know?" "I saw a local estate sales sign in her yard. I drove by. She had your father's grandmother clock on sale, the one with the brass pendulum." I felt the rage burning in my chest again, but I forced it down. "Do you remember the date?" "October 11th. I nodded. "Thank you. That's going to be very helpful." I drove to the Fairfax Public Library. It was a modern building, all glass and steel, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. I found a private study room and locked the door behind me. I needed to work. I needed to focus. I needed to build a case that would shatter my brother and his wife beyond repair. I pulled out my secure government laptop and plugged in the USB drive Marcus had given me. The video files transferred quickly, and I began organizing them chronologically. I created a folder for each month and labeled each clip with the date and a description of what it contained. September 2, Priscilla strikes William on front porch. September 14, real estate agent visits, listing discussion. October 8, Rodney drags William away from front door. October 11, Priscilla loading furniture for estate sale. Then I opened the power of attorney document and scanned it into my laptop. I zoomed in on the signature at 400% magnification and began examining it pixel by pixel. The forgery was obvious to a trained eye. The pressure patterns were wrong. The stroke order was inconsistent. The person who had signed this document had been trying to copy my father's signature, but had made fundamental errors in the way they formed each letter. I pulled up a known authentic signature of my father's, a document from the previous year, and layered the 2 images on top of each other. The differences jumped out immediately. The W in William was too sharp. The V in Vance leaned too far to the left. The descender on the E was too short. Multiple points of discrepancy, each one damning. I opened my encrypted messaging app and sent a request to my lab in D.C. Need full spectrographic analysis on question document. Will send via secure channel. Priority 1. The response came within minutes. Acknowledged. Send the file. I uploaded the scanned image of the POA and waited. The analysis would take a few hours, but I didn't need to wait idly. There was more work to do. I pulled up the banking records I had gathered from my father's house and started building a spreadsheet. I listed every transaction from the last 3 months, every wire transfer, every cash withdrawal, every suspicious payment. The amount was staggering. $310,000. 78 had been drained from my father's accounts, most of it funneled directly into the stakeholders' Bet online gambling platform. I cross-referenced the dates of the wire transfers with the dates of the real estate listing. The pattern was clear. Every time Rodney's gambling debts spiked, he made a withdrawal. Every time he needed more money to feed his addiction, he stole from the one person who trusted him most. I found a trail of payments to a burner phone number that had been used to contact the real estate agent. The phone had been registered to a fake name and address, but the transaction history showed it had been purchased at a local convenience store. I added that to my evidence file. I pulled up the medical records Dr. Sharma had given me and started cross-referencing them with the prescriptions I'd found in the garage. The unused medication, the dehydration, the malnutrition, the restraint marks. I was building a timeline of abuse that was so complete, so meticulously documented that no jury could ignore it. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Jenkins. "How's it going? Need anything?" I typed back. "I need to know more about Priscilla's past, the story you mentioned, the elderly woman. It's a long story. Can we talk in person?" I checked the time. It was 11:30 a.m. The Rusty Bucket Diner, 1 p.m. I'll be there. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. The evidence was piling up, piece by piece, brick by brick. I was building a wall of proof so high and so solid that my brother and his wife would never be able to climb over it. But something was still nagging at me. Something I couldn't quite identify. I had the documentation. I had the video evidence. I had the witness testimony. And yet there was still a piece missing. Something that would tie everything together with a bow of absolute certainty. I thought about the burner phone I'd found in the kitchen trash can. I pulled it out of my evidence bag and examined it. A cheap prepaid device, the kind you buy with cash and throw away when you're done. I powered it on and scrolled through the contact list. It was empty. The call log was empty. The messages were deleted, but nothing is ever truly deleted. I plugged the phone into my laptop and ran a data recovery program. The device was old, the memory storage primitive. It took about 15 minutes for the program to do its work, but when it finished, I had what I needed. A list of deleted texts, messages between Rodney and Priscilla, messages about the house, about the money, about my father. "This article is called Prosecuting Elder Abuse," I whispered to myself as I scrolled through the conversations. And then I found it. A text from Rodney to Priscilla dated October 10th, 4 days ago. "Just keep him quiet until the house closes, then we're free." I stared at the words on the screen. My brother, my own brother, telling his wife to keep my father quiet, to keep him locked up, to keep him starving and suffering until the house sale went through and they could disappear with the money. I felt the cold certainty settle over me like a shroud. This was the missing piece, the final nail in the coffin. I had Rodney's own words, in his own voice, preserved for all eternity. He had written that message. He had sent it. And now I had it. I saved the file to my evidence folder. I made 3 backups. I encrypted the originals. I was going to protect this evidence with my life. I looked at the clock. 12:15 p.m. I packed up my equipment and drove to the Rusty Bucket Diner. The diner was a Fairfax institution, a red and chrome building that had been serving comfort food to locals for decades. I found Sarah Jenkins in a booth at the back, nursing a cup of coffee. She looked up as I approached and gave me a tired smile. "Claudia," she said, standing to hug me, "you look like you haven't slept." "I haven't, but that's okay. I'm getting things done." We sat down and a waitress came to take my order. I asked for black coffee and a slice of pie I had no intention of eating. When the waitress left, I leaned forward and looked at Sarah. "Tell me everything you know about Priscilla." Sarah took a deep breath. Her full name is Priscilla Montgomery Vance. She grew up in a small town in Maryland. Her mother died when she was young. Her father remarried and she never got along with her stepmother. She moved to Fairfax about 10 years ago, and that's when she started getting her hooks into people. "Tell me about the elderly woman." Her name was Margaret Ellison. She lived in the same apartment complex as Priscilla. She was in her late 70s, a retired school teacher. She had a small pension and a modest savings account, enough to live on but not enough to change anyone's life. I nodded. "Go on." "Priscilla befriended her. She started bringing her meals. She took her to doctor's appointments. She did her grocery shopping. Margaret was lonely, and Priscilla was exactly the kind of person she needed, a younger woman who seemed to care about her. But it wasn't genuine." Sarah shook her head. "It was calculated. Priscilla got Margaret to change her will. She got her to name Priscilla as the sole beneficiary. Margaret's family caught wind of it and tried to stop it, but Priscilla had Margaret convinced that her family didn't care about her. She isolated her. She made her dependent on Priscilla. By the time Margaret's family finally got involved, Margaret was in a nursing home, and Priscilla had already siphoned off most of her savings." "How much?" "About $85,000. The family sued and got some of it back, but they never pressed criminal charges. They were just grateful to get their aunt out of Priscilla's clutches." I leaned back in the booth. "So this is a pattern, a predator who targets the vulnerable." "Yes, she's good at it. She's charming when she wants to be. She knows exactly what to say to make people trust her, and she has no conscience at all." I thought about my father, about the gentle, trusting man who had opened his home to his son and daughter-in-law. He had been the perfect target. Elderly, alone, too trusting for his own good. "She's going to prison," I said. "Both of them are going to prison. I have enough evidence to put them away for a decade." Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. "Good. That's where they belong." My phone buzzed, an email from the DOJ lab. I opened it and read the message. "Analysis complete. The question document signature is a forgery. Discrepancies identified in 14 points of comparison. Full report attached." I smiled. It was the smile of a predator closing in on its prey. "That was the lab," I said. "The POA is officially a forgery. I have the report to prove it." Sarah nodded. "What happens now?" "I take everything I have and I build a federal case. I bring in the FBI. I file charges. I watch them get arrested and tried and convicted. And then I never see them again. My father and I move on with our lives. They rot in prison where they belong." Sarah squeezed my hand. "You're doing the right thing, Claudia. Your father is lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have him," as I said. "He's all the family I have left." I left the diner at 2:30 p.m. and drove back to the library. I had work to do. I had a case to build. I had 72 hours to complete my federal file, and I wasn't going to waste a single second. I spent the rest of the afternoon organizing my evidence into a comprehensive case file. I created a document for each section: the victim, the perpetrators, the crime, the evidence, the timeline, the witnesses. I included every piece of documentation I had gathered, every video clip, every bank record, every medical file. I wrote the narrative in the dry, formal language of a federal investigator. This was not a story. This was a prosecution brief. This was the document that would end my brother's freedom forever. By 10 p.m., I was exhausted. My eyes were burning and my back ached from sitting hunched over my laptop. But I wasn't done. I still had one more thing to do. I called my supervisor at the DOJ. "Assistant Director Miller," I said, "I need to file a formal complaint." "What kind of complaint?" "Elder abuse, financial fraud, Forgery, I have a complete case file. I'm ready to bring it to the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, send it to me. I'll review it tonight and get back to you in the morning. Thank you, sir. I hung up and looked at my father's face on my laptop screen. It was a recent photo, one Sarah had sent me from the garden club. He was smiling, his eyes bright, his cheeks full. The image felt like a ghost, a memory of the man I had once known and the shell he had been reduced to. I closed my laptop and lay down on the library floor, using my bag as a pillow. I stared up at the ceiling and let my mind go blank, just for a moment, just for a minute of peace. The silence was broken by the soft chime of my phone, a text from an unknown number. The sale is going through tomorrow, we're free. It was Rodney. He had sent the message to the wrong number. He thought he was texting Priscilla. He was gloating about the house sale. He was celebrating his freedom. I sat up and stared at the message. My hands were shaking with anger. Like hell you are, I whispered. I typed back, you might want to check with your lawyer first. I hit send. I knew it was risky. I knew I was giving away the element of surprise, but I didn't care. I wanted them to know. I wanted them to feel the fear that my father had felt when they locked him in that room. The response came within seconds. Who is this? I didn't answer. I turned off my phone and lay back down on the library floor. Tomorrow was going to be a very long day. I closed my eyes and slept. I woke up on the library floor at 6:17 a.m. The fluorescent lights were still humming overhead, casting that same sterile glow that had been there when I'd closed my eyes. My neck was stiff and my back ached, but I didn't care. I had work to do. I sat up and checked my phone. 3 missed calls from unknown numbers, 2 voicemails. I listened to the first one. This is Rodney. I know you got my text. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to stay out of this. This is family business. You have no right to interfere. His voice was shaky, defensive, the voice of a man who knew he was in trouble and was trying to bluff his way out. I listened to the second voicemail. Claudia, it's Priscilla. I don't know what kind of delusions you're having, but you need to stop. Your father is fine. He's been fine. He's just old and confused. You're making a scene over nothing. If you don't back off, I'm going to file a restraining order against you. Her voice was cold, controlled. The voice of a predator who had been cornered and was trying to find a way out. I deleted both messages and called my supervisor. Assistant Director Miller, I said. It's Claudia Vance. I need to know if you reviewed my case file. I did, he said. I read it twice. It's the most thorough elder abuse case I've seen in my career. You've got everything. The forgery, the financial records, the medical evidence, the video footage. It's a slam dunk. Then I need to move forward. I need to bring in the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit. Already taken care of, he said. I made the call last night. Special Agent Daniel Reyes is your contact. He's expecting you at the Fairfax FBI field office at 9 a.m. I've already sent him a copy of your file. I felt a surge of relief so powerful it nearly knocked me back down. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. You never do, Vance. Now go get them. I hung up and packed my equipment. The library was just starting to open, the early morning light filtering through the glass windows. I walked out into the crisp October air and drove to the FBI field office. The building was a nondescript beige structure on the edge of town, the kind of place that was designed to blend in and not draw attention. I parked in the visitor lot and walked through the security checkpoint, my government ID badge getting me through without any questions. Special Agent Daniel Reyes met me in the lobby. He was in his late 40s, tall and lean with graying temples and the calm, steady demeanor of a career investigator. He extended his hand, and I shook it. Agent Vance, he said, I've read your file. Impressive work. Thank you, Agent Reyes. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. Call me Daniel. Let's go to my office. We've got a lot to discuss. We walked through the sterile hallways to his office, a small space cluttered with files and papers. He gestured for me to sit and close the door behind us. I've been doing this for 22 years, he said, settling into his chair. I've seen a lot of cases, but your file is one of the most comprehensive I've ever reviewed. You didn't miss a single detail. The forgery authentication, the financial trail, the video evidence. It's all there. I had a good team, I said. A neighbor who had the foresight to keep his security footage, a family friend who knew about Priscilla's past, and my own experience with forensic analysis. Daniel nodded. The forgery report is airtight. Your lab did an excellent job. 14 points of discrepancy. That's enough to convict on the forgery charges alone. Add in the elder abuse, the financial fraud, and the wire transfers, and we're looking at a federal case that could put them away for a decade or more. That's what I want, I said. I want them to face the maximum penalty. You'll get it, he said, but we need to move fast. I checked the status of the house sale. It's scheduled to close tomorrow at 10 a.m. If we don't stop it, the property will transfer to the buyers, and it becomes a civil matter instead of a criminal one. I already filed an emergency petition to halt the sale, I said. I sent it to the Fairfax County Courthouse yesterday afternoon. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Good thinking. That buys us some time, but we need to do more. We need to arrest them before the sale goes through. We need to seize their assets and freeze their accounts. I'm ready for that. What do you need from me? Your testimony, your evidence, and your willingness to see this through to the end. I've been willing since the moment I found my father in that room, I said. Daniel nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. We spent the next 2 hours going over every detail of the case. Daniel made notes, asked questions, and flagged anything that might need additional documentation. By the time we were done, I had a clear understanding of what was going to happen next. We're going to execute a search warrant on their home this afternoon, Daniel said. We'll seize their computers, their phones, their financial records. We'll arrest them on charges of elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. They'll be processed and held in federal custody pending trial. And the house sale? Your emergency petition will be heard by a judge this morning. I've already spoken to the prosecutor's office. They're going to request a temporary restraining order. The sale will be frozen until the criminal case is resolved. I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Thank you, Daniel. I don't know how to repay you for this. You don't have to repay me. This is my job. And frankly, cases like this are the reason I got into law enforcement, watching predators get what they deserve. I left his office at 11:30 a.m. and drove to Mercy General Hospital. I needed to see my father. I needed to tell him that justice was coming. He was awake when I walked into his room, sitting up in bed with a tray of food in front of him. The bruises on his face were starting to fade, the purple giving way to sickly yellow. He looked better than he had 2 days ago, but still so fragile, so broken. Claudia, he said, a smile spreading across his face. You look tired. Are you sleeping at all? I'll sleep when this is over, I said, pulling a chair up to his bedside. Dad, I need to tell you something. The FBI is going to arrest Rodney and Priscilla today. They're going to face federal charges. They're going to prison. My father's smile faded. He looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. I never wanted this, he said quietly. I never wanted my son to go to prison. I know, Dad, but they did this to you. They locked you in a room. They starved you. They stole your money. They sold your things. They're not innocent victims, they're criminals. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I know what they did, and I know I should hate them. But part of me still remembers when Rodney was a little boy, when he used to run through the backyard and laugh, when he used to call me Dad and mean it. I reached out and took his hand. That little boy is gone, Dad. He grew up into a man who hurt you, and that man needs to face consequences for what he did. I understand, he said. I never thought it would come to this. Neither did I, but it did, and now we have to deal with it. He nodded slowly. Do what you have to do, I trust you. I squeezed his hand and stood up. I'll be back tonight, Dad, I promise. I left the hospital at 12:30 p.m. and drove to 1423 Maplewood Lane. I wanted to be there when the FBI arrived. I wanted to watch my brother and his wife taken away in handcuffs. I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized their game was over. The street was quiet when I arrived. I parked across the street from my father's house and waited. The minutes stretched out like hours. The sun climbed higher in the sky, the October air warm and still. And then I saw them. 4 unmarked SUVs pulled into the driveway, flanked by a marked police cruiser. The doors opened and agents in tactical gear spilled out, moving with practiced precision toward the front door. Daniel Reyes was among them, his face set in a grim expression. I got out of my car and walked across the street. I wanted to be close. I wanted to witness every moment. The agents knocked on the front door, no answer. They knocked again, still nothing. "Police!" Daniel shouted. "Open the door!" A muffled voice from inside. I couldn't make out the words. Daniel gestured to his team. 2 agents moved to the back of the house. Another took position at the side door. And then the front door opened. Rodney stood in the doorway, his face pale and sweating. He was wearing a rumpled t-shirt and jeans, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man who had been caught in a trap. "Rodney Vance," Daniel said, "we have a warrant for your arrest. You're being charged with elder abuse, financial fraud, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." Rodney's eyes darted around wildly. He looked past Daniel and saw me standing on the sidewalk, his face twisted with rage. "You," he spat. "You did this. You ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything," I said. "You did, you and your wife. You did this to yourselves." Priscilla appeared behind Rodney, her face a mask of cold fury. She was wearing designer clothes, her hair perfectly styled even in the midst of her arrest. She looked at me with such hatred that I almost took a step back. "Claudia," she hissed, "you have no idea what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done," I said. "I've brought justice to my father." "Your father is a senile old man," she snapped. "He doesn't know what he's saying. He's confused. He's making things up." "I have video footage," I said. "I have medical records. I have bank statements. I have a full forensic analysis of the forged POA. You can lie to yourself all you want, but you can't lie to the evidence." Priscilla's mask cracked. For just a moment, I saw fear flash across her face, and then it was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated rage. "This isn't over," she said. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure you regret this." "Get her out of here," Daniel said. 2 agents took Priscilla by the arms and led her out of the house. She was screaming obscenities, struggling against their grip. Rodney followed behind her, silent and defeated, his eyes fixed on the ground. I watched them being loaded into the back of a police cruiser. The doors slammed shut, the engine started, and then they were gone. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at the empty driveway. The house was silent now, the windows dark. It looked like a tomb. Daniel walked over to me. "Are you okay?" I nodded slowly. "I think I am. For the first time in 3 days, I think I'm okay." "Good. Because we're not done yet. We still have to build the case for trial. We still have to make sure they stay locked up." "I'm ready for that," I said. "I've been ready my whole life." Daniel smiled. "I don't doubt it." I walked back to my car and sat in the driver's seat. My hands were trembling slightly. I looked at the house one more time. The house where I grew up. The house where my father had been tortured by his own son. And then I started the engine and drove away. I had work to do. The afternoon was a blur of activity. I went back to the Fairfax Public Library and spent hours organizing my evidence for the prosecution. I created detailed timelines. I cross-referenced documents. I made sure every single piece of evidence was accounted for. At 6 p.m., I went back to the hospital. My father was sitting up in bed, watching the evening news on the small television mounted on the wall. He turned to me as I walked in, his eyes searching my face. "It's done," I said. "They are arrested. They are in federal custody." My father nodded slowly. "Thank you, Claudia. I don't know how to." "You don't have to thank me, Dad. You're my father. I would do anything for you." He reached out and took my hand. I know, I I never thought it would come to this. I never thought my own son. I know, Dad. I know. We sat in silence for a long moment watching the news. The reporter was talking about a local development project, something about a new shopping center. It felt surreal, normal. The world was going on as usual, even though everything had changed. "What happens now?" my father asked. "Now we wait for the trial. We present the evidence. They go to prison, and then we move on with our lives." "Where will I go? I can't go back to the house, not after everything that happened there." "You'll come with me," I said. "To D.C. I have a cottage in my backyard. It's small, but it's comfortable. You can stay there until you figure out what you want to do next." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do. You've always deserved me. You've always deserved the best." He smiled, a real smile, the first one I'd seen since I'd found him in that room. "I love you, Claudia. I love you too, Dad. More than anything." The weeks that followed were a blur of legal filings and court appearances. I testified before a grand jury. I met with federal prosecutors. I handed over every piece of evidence I had gathered. The trial was set for January. Rodney and Priscilla were held in federal custody without bail. They were facing a combined total of 12 federal charges. The maximum sentence was 35 years. I went back to D.C. in November. I arranged for my father to be transferred to a rehabilitation facility near my home. He was slowly gaining weight back. His bruises were healing. The doctors said he would make a full recovery, though he would never be quite the same. I spent my days working on my regular cases and my evenings visiting my father. We would sit in his room and talk about the past, about my mother, about the time I fell out of a tree and broke my arm, about the time I graduated from college and he cried in the front row. We never talked about Rodney, not if we could help it. And then January came. The trial was held at the Fairfax County Courthouse, a grand old building with marble columns and a soaring rotunda. I walked in on the first day of testimony with my evidence binder tucked under my arm and a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. I was ready. I was ready to face my brother. I was ready to tell the world what he and his wife had done. I was ready to see justice done. The courtroom was packed. Rodney and Priscilla sat at the defense table, their attorneys whispering in their ears. They looked different now, smaller, diminished. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen before: fear. I took my seat in the gallery and waited for the trial to begin. It was going to be a long few weeks, but I was ready. I was ready for anything. The trial began on a gray January morning. I stood outside the Fairfax County Courthouse, watching the clouds gather overhead, and I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The last 3 months had been a blur of preparation and waiting for the trial date, waiting for my father to heal, waiting for the moment when I could finally put my brother and his wife behind bars for what they had done. The courthouse was an imposing building, all granite and glass, with a soaring rotunda that echoed with the footsteps of lawyers and defendants and witnesses. I walked through the metal detectors and into the main corridor, my evidence binder clutched against my chest like a shield. The courtroom was already filling up when I arrived. I took my seat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecution table. The U.S. attorney, a sharp woman named Diane Morrison, was already there, arranging her files with meticulous precision. She looked up as I sat down and gave me a small nod. "Agent Vance," she said. "Ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. The defense attorneys arrived next. Rodney and Priscilla had hired 2 separate attorneys, a sign that cracks were already forming in their alliance. Rodney's lawyer was a nervous-looking man named Harold Finney, who kept fidgeting with his tie. Priscilla's attorney was a coal-dyed woman named Victoria Cross, who projected an air of unearned superiority. And then the bailiff opened the side door and Rodney and Priscilla were let in. They were wearing civilian clothes, but they looked nothing like the people I had confronted 3 months ago. Rodney's face was pale and drawn, his eyes hollow. He had lost weight, his shirt hanging loose on his frame. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. Priscilla, by contrast, had maintained her composure. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothes expensive and pressed. She walked with her chin held high, her expression a mask of cold defiance. But I saw the cracks. I saw the way her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies that weren't there. I saw the way her jaw tightened when she spotted me in the gallery. She knew she was in trouble. The judge entered and everyone rose. Judge Margaret Chen was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, and I had read enough of her rulings to know she didn't tolerate games in her courtroom. "Are the parties ready to proceed?" Judge Chen asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Diane Morrison said. "The defense is ready," Harold Finney said. "Likewise," Victoria Cross added. Judge Chen nodded. "Then let's begin, Ms. Morrison, your opening statement." Diane Morrison rose and walked to the center of the courtroom. She was a tall woman with a commanding presence, her voice clear and steady as she addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the course of this trial, you will hear evidence of a crime so cruel, so calculated, that it will shake your faith in the bonds of family. You will hear about William Vance, a 74-year-old man who was systematically starved, abused, and imprisoned in his own home by the very people who should have protected him, his son and his daughter-in-law." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You will see video footage of Priscilla Vance striking her elderly father-in-law. You will hear testimony from medical experts about the restraint marks on his wrists and the malnutrition that nearly killed him. You will examine bank records that show how Rodney and Priscilla Vance stole $310,078 from his retirement savings and funneled it into online gambling. And you will see a forged power of attorney document, authenticated by the Department of Justice, that proves beyond any doubt that these defendants deliberately and fraudulently took control of their victims' finances." She walked slowly in front of the jury box, making eye contact with each juror in turn. "But the most damning evidence you will hear," she continued, "is the evidence of their own words. You will hear a recorded phone call in which Rodney Vance tells his wife to keep his father quiet until the house sale goes through. Those words, ladies and gentlemen, are the confession of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and was willing to let his own father die for money." She returned to her seat, and the courtroom was silent. Harold Finney rose for the defense. He was sweating visibly, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "my client, Rodney Vance, is a good man who made terrible mistakes. He was suffering from a gambling addiction. He was manipulated by his wife. He made choices that he deeply regrets. But he did not act with malice. He was not the mastermind of this scheme. He was a victim of circumstances, just like his father." I felt my jaw tighten. He was already setting up his defense. Blame the wife, blame the addiction, take no responsibility. Victoria Cross rose next. Her opening statement was shorter, colder. "Priscilla Vance is innocent of these charges," she said. "She was a devoted wife who tried to care for her aging father-in-law. Any allegations of abuse are false and exaggerated. The prosecution is relying on the testimony of a bitter daughter who is trying to destroy her brother's life for reasons that have nothing to do with justice. We will prove that Priscilla Vance is not the monster the prosecution is painting her to be." The opening statements concluded, and the prosecution began presenting its case. The first witness was Dr. Anya Sharma. She took the stand with the calm professionalism I had come to expect from her. She described my father's condition when he was admitted to Mercy General Hospital on October 14th. "Mr. Vance was severely malnourished," she testified. "He had lost approximately 35 pounds in the previous 8 to 10 weeks. He was severely dehydrated. His blood work showed critical deficiencies in potassium, sodium, and protein. He had multiple contusions on his face, torso, and extremities, consistent with blunt force trauma. And what did you find on his wrists? Diane Morrison asked. Lacerations and bruising consistent with restraint. The injuries were deep enough to break the skin in some places. Based on the pattern and healing stage, I believe he was restrained repeatedly over a period of weeks. Did you find evidence that his medications were being withheld? Yes, Mr. Vance suffers from hypertension and requires daily blood pressure medication. There were no traces of the medication in his system, and his blood pressure was dangerously high. Based on my clinical assessment, he had not received his medication for at least 3 weeks. The jury was taking notes, their faces grim. I watched Rodney and Priscilla at the defense table. Rodney was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped. Priscilla was watching Dr. Sharma with a look of pure hatred. The next witness was Marcus Webb. He took the stand in his pressed military uniform, his back straight and his voice steady. I live next door to William Vance, he testified. I've known him for 15 years. He's a good man, a kind man. I started noticing changes in August. He stopped coming outside. He stopped tending his garden. I could hear shouting from the house, and I could hear him crying. Did you ever see anything that concerned you? Diane Morrison asked. Yes, I saw Priscilla Vance strike him on the front porch. I have video footage of it from my doorbell camera. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Chen banged her gavel. The video footage was played on a large screen. I watched my father stumble down the walkway, his body frail and weak. I watched Priscilla storm out of the house and grab his arm. I watched her shove him against the railing. I watched her slap him across the face. The jury watched in silence. Several of them looked away. One woman wiped tears from her eyes. When the video ended, Diane Morrison turned to Marcus Webb. Mr. Webb, did you ever see anyone else physically abuse William Vance? Only once, he said. I saw Rodney drag his father away from the front door. He grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and pulled him back inside. It was not gentle. Thank you, Mr. Webb. No further questions. Harold Finney rose for cross-examination. Mr. Webb, were you ever inside the Vance home? No, sir. Did you ever speak to William Vance about what was happening? I tried to, but Priscilla always got in the way. She told me my father-in-law didn't want visitors. So you don't actually know what was happening inside the house, do you? I know what I saw and heard, Marcus Webb said firmly. I saw abuse. I heard crying. I reported it to the police twice. But you never confirmed with William Vance himself that he was being abused. I tried to confirm. I was prevented. Harold Finney sat down, looking frustrated. Victoria Cross rose. Mr. Webb, she said, her voice smooth and cold. You're a retired military man, is that correct? Yes. And you've installed security cameras around your property. You seem like the kind of person who's always looking for trouble. My training has made me observant, Marcus Webb replied. I don't apologize for that. Victoria Cross sat down without another word. The next day I was called to the stand. I walked to the witness box and raised my hand. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. I sat down and looked at the jury. They were watching me intently, their faces open and expectant. Agent Vance, Diane Morrison said, can you please state your profession for the jury? I am a senior forensic document examiner for the Department of Justice. I specialize in fraud and forgery. And are you related to the defendants? Yes, Rodney Vance is my older brother. Priscilla Vance is his wife. Can you tell the jury how you became involved in this case? I took a deep breath and began. I told them about the phone call from my father, the trembling whisper that had sent me racing home. I told them about finding him locked in that bedroom, starving and bruised and terrified. I told them about the hospital, the restraint marks, the 20 minutes I spent sobbing in my car. There came a moment, I said, when I realized I could fall apart or I could become something else, something they never saw coming. I chose to become that something. What did you do next? I returned to my father's house and began gathering evidence. I found the forged power of attorney document. I found the medical records showing that his prescriptions were being picked up but never given to him. I found the bank statements showing that $310,000 78 had been systematically drained from his accounts. How did you authenticate the power of attorney? I sent a scanned copy to the DOJ forensic lab. Using spectrographic analysis and known authentic signatures for comparison, we identified 14 points of discrepancy. The signature was a forgery. I saw Rodney slump further in his chair. Priscilla's mask cracked slightly. The prosecution continued to present evidence. The bank records were shown, the real estate documents, the burner phone and the text messages, the recorded phone call. That came later. That came at the end of the prosecution's case. And when it did, I was called back to the stand. Diane Morrison approached me with a small digital recorder. "Agent Vance, do you recognize this device?" "Yes, it's the burner phone I recovered from my father's kitchen trash can." "And what did you find on it?" "Deleted text messages that I was able to recover using forensic software. Messages between Rodney and Priscilla Vance, including one that reads, 'Just keep him quiet until the house closes.'" "And who sent that message?" "Rodney Vance. The date stamp shows it was sent on October 10th, 2023. Diane Morrison pressed play. The courtroom was silent as Rodney's voice filled the room. He was speaking to Priscilla. His voice was low, conspiratorial. "Just keep him quiet until the house closes. Then we're free. He's not going to survive much longer anyway. It's just a matter of time." The recording ended. The courtroom was deathly silent. I watched Priscilla's face. For the first time, I saw something other than defiance. I saw shock. I saw horror. I saw the realization that her husband had been willing to sacrifice her to save himself. I watched Rodney. He was crying, big, messy tears that dripped down his cheeks. "It wasn't my idea," he said, his voice cracking. "She made me do it. She threatened to leave me if I didn't go along with it. I was just trying to save my marriage." The courtroom erupted. Judge Chen banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order," she shouted. "Order in the court." Rodney's attorney, Harold Finney, was on his feet. "Your Honor, my client is clearly distressed. I request a brief recess." "Denied," Judge Chen snapped. "The witness will remain on the stand." "Continue, Ms. Morrison." Diane Morrison turned to me. "Agent Vance, do you have any response to what you just heard?" I looked at my brother. My own brother, crying in the witness box, trying to blame his wife for the mess he had created. "I have no response," I said quietly. "I don't have any words for what I just heard. My brother is a liar. He's been a liar his whole life. He's been lying about this from the beginning." "Thank you, Agent Vance. No further questions." Harold Finney rose. "Agent Vance, do you hate your brother?" I looked at him. "No, I don't hate him. I pity him. He's destroyed everything. His father's trust, his own future, his marriage. Everything he touched, he broke." "Objection," Victoria Cross called out. "The witness is being prejudicial." "Sustained," Judge Chen said. "The witness will confine her answers to the questions asked." But it was too late. The damage was done. The jury had seen my brother's pathetic attempt to blame his wife. They had heard the evidence. They had seen the video footage of Priscilla slapping my father. They knew the truth. The closing arguments were brief. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, and then the bailiff called us back into the courtroom. "We, the jury, find the defendant Rodney Vance guilty on all counts." "We, the jury, find the defendant Priscilla Vance guilty on all counts." Priscilla screamed. She lunged toward me, her face twisted with rage. "You did this," she shrieked. "You did this to us." 2 bailiffs grabbed her and restrained her. She struggled against them, still screaming. Rodney just sat there. He was staring at the floor, his tears still flowing. He looked like a man who had already lost everything. Judge Chen banged her gavel. "The defendants will be remanded into federal custody pending sentencing. The hearing will take place in 2 weeks. The court is adjourned." I walked out of the courtroom into the crisp January air. The clouds had parted, and the sun was shining down on the courthouse steps. I took a deep breath and felt the weight of 3 months lift off my shoulders. It was over. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. I was there, sitting in the front row. My father was there too, sitting beside me. He was still frail, still recovering, but he was alive. He was here. Rodney and Priscilla stood before the judge. They were wearing orange jumpsuits now, their faces pale and defeated. Before I pronounce sentence, Judge Chen said, "Does anyone wish to speak?" Rodney spoke first. His voice was trembling. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry for what I did. I was sick. I had a gambling addiction. I couldn't see what I was doing. I lost everything. My father, my sister, my wife, everything." My father shook his head slowly. "He's not sorry," he whispered to me. "He's sorry he got caught." Priscilla spoke next. She was defiant to the end. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said. "I was taking care of my father-in-law. I was trying to help. This is all a misunderstanding." Judge Chen looked at them both. "I've been a judge for 23 years, she said. "I have presided over countless cases of elder abuse. I have seen the cruelty that people are capable of inflicting on their own family members. But this case, with its calculated cruelty and deliberate premeditation, ranks among the worst I have ever witnessed. Rodney Vance, you were entrusted with your father's care. Instead of protecting him, you exploited him. You conspired with your wife to steal his money, forge legal documents, and sell his home. You locked him in a room and starved him. You deliberately withheld his medication. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are a predator who preyed on the one person who trusted you most. Priscilla Vance, you were the architect of this abuse. You were the one who physically struck your father-in-law. You were the one who isolated him from his friends and his community. You were the one who treated his suffering as an inconvenience to be managed. The jury has convicted you both on all counts. I sentence you each to 12 years in federal prison. The restitution order is for $310,000.78, and the sale of 1,423 Maplewood Lane is hereby reversed. The property is returned to William Vance." Rodney broke down sobbing. Priscilla stood rigid, her face frozen in an expression of hatred. They were led away. My father turned to me and took my hand. His grip was stronger now than it had been 3 months ago. "It's over," he said. "It's finally over." "Yes," I said. "It's over." We walked out of the courthouse together into the sunlight, and for the first time in months I felt something I had almost forgotten. I felt peace. The weeks after the trial passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. The world felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. I went back to work at the DOJ, throwing myself into my cases with a renewed sense of purpose. But every evening, I drove home to my father. He was living in the cottage behind my house now. I had spent the last few months renovating it, making it comfortable and accessible. Wide doorways for his walker, a walk-in shower with grab bars, a small kitchen where he could make his tea and toast in the morning. It wasn't much, but it was his. A place where he could heal, and he was healing. Slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless. The bruises had faded completely, replaced by the healthy color of a man who was finally eating properly again. He had gained back 15 pounds, and his face no longer looked like a skull wrapped in skin. His eyes had regained some of their old sparkle, though there was still a shadow there, a sadness that I didn't think would ever fully go away. He had been through something terrible, something that would leave scars that no amount of time could fully erase. But he was alive, he was safe, and that was everything. One evening in early March, I came home to find him sitting on the small patio behind the cottage, watching the birds at the feeder I'd hung for him. The weather was starting to warm, the first hints of spring in the air. I walked over and sat down beside him, a cup of coffee in each hand. "Beautiful evening," I said, handing him a mug. He took it with a grateful smile. "It is. I've been watching the cardinals. There's a pair that come every evening around this time. The male is so bright red, you can see him from across the yard." I smiled. "I'm glad you're enjoying it." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping our coffee and watching the birds. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was peaceful, calm, everything I had been fighting for. "Claudia," my father said finally, his voice soft. "I need to tell you something." I turned to look at him. "What is it, Dad?" He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly around his mug. "I got a letter today from Rodney." I felt my jaw tighten. "Dad, you don't have to read it. You don't have to have anything to do with him." "I know," he said, "but I read it anyway. I needed to see what he had to say." "And what did he say?" My father was quiet for a long moment. He said he was sorry. He said he's been going to therapy in prison. He said he's trying to understand why he did what he did. He asked for my forgiveness. I reached out and took his hand. "And what did you tell him?" "I haven't told him anything yet. I wanted to talk to you first." I squeezed his hand gently. "Dad, you don't have to forgive him. You don't owe him anything. He did terrible things to you, things that should never have happened." "I know," he said, "and I don't think I can forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I also don't want to carry this hatred in my heart forever. It's too heavy. It's like a poison eating away at me from the inside." I understood what he meant. I had felt that same poison in my own veins, the burning rage that had driven me through those dark days of investigation and trial. But now that it was over, now that justice had been served, I found that the rage had faded. What was left was something else, something like peace. "Then don't forgive him," I said. "But don't hate him either. Just let him go. He's not your son anymore. He made that choice when he locked you in that room." My father nodded slowly. "I know, and I think that's what I needed to hear. I needed someone to tell me it was okay to let go." "It's more than okay," I said. "It's necessary, for your own peace of mind." He took a sip of his coffee and stared out at the garden. "I'm going to write him back, not to forgive him, just to tell him that I'm done, that I'm moving on with my life and he should do the same." "That sounds like a good idea, Dad." He nodded again. "I think so too." We sat in silence for a while longer, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The cardinals had flown away, replaced by the soft chirping of crickets. The air was cool and clean, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers from the garden. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt at peace. The next morning, I drove to the Fairfax County Courthouse to pick up the final paperwork for the house. The sale had been officially reversed, and the property had been returned to my father. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it meant the world to him. The clerk handed me the documents with a sympathetic smile. "I'm glad it worked out for your family," she said. "I read about the case in the paper. What those people did to your father was just terrible." "Thank you," I said. "It's been a long road, but we're finally putting it behind us." I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright March sunshine. The sky was a brilliant blue, the kind of sky that made you believe in new beginnings. I stood on the steps for a long moment, just breathing in the fresh air. And then I drove to 1423 Maplewood Lane. The house looked different now. The "for sale" sign was gone. The overgrown lawn had been trimmed. Sarah Jenkins had organized a neighborhood cleanup, and the volunteers had worked tirelessly to restore the property to its former glory. The house wasn't perfect, but it was home again. I walked up the front steps and unlocked the door. The inside was empty. Rodney and Priscilla had sold or stolen most of the furniture, and what remained had been donated. But the walls were still the same. The floors were still the same. The memories were still the same. I walked through the rooms slowly, letting the nostalgia wash over me. The kitchen where my mother used to bake cookies. The living room where we'd watched football games together. The hallway where my father had taught me to ride a bike years ago when the house was new and full of hope. I stopped at the back bedroom. The door had been repaired, the splintered frame replaced, but I could still see it in my mind. The locked door, the scratching sound, my father's voice, barely audible, calling my name. I opened the door and stepped inside. The room was empty now, stripped of all the horror. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the hardwood floor. It was just a room, just a quiet, ordinary room. I stood there for a long moment, letting the ghosts of the past finally rest. And then I closed the door and walked away. That evening, I sat on my deck with my father. The cottage was just behind us, its lights warm and inviting. The stars were beginning to appear, scattered across the darkening sky like diamonds. My father was dozing in a comfortable chair, a blanket draped over his lap. His breathing was slow and even his face relaxed in sleep. He looked peaceful. Happy, even. A world away from the broken man I had found in that bedroom 3 months ago. I sipped my coffee and watched him sleep, and I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the pain, the fight for justice, the long, difficult road to this moment. I thought about my brother, about the man he had become, about the choices he had made that had destroyed our family. I didn't forgive him. I didn't think I ever could, but I also didn't hate him anymore. The anger had faded, replaced by something colder, something like indifference. He was a stranger now, a stranger who shared my blood but nothing else, and I was okay with that. I had my father. I had my peace. I had my life back. The greatest lesson I learned from all of this is that justice isn't about punishing the people who hurt you. It's about finding the strength to stand up for yourself and for the people you love. It's about reclaiming your power and refusing to let anyone take it away from you. It's about letting go of the weight you were never meant to carry. I looked up at the stars and I smiled. The world was full of possibilities, full of hope, full of new beginnings, and I was ready for all of them. Have you ever had to be the one person who says enough for the ones you love? Share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe for more empowering journeys.